My mother was 73 years old when she was diagnosed, and 76 when she passed. Those 3 years were the most difficult of my life, not just because of the illness, which was progressive and unforgiving, but because of what happened within my family during that time. Things that I did not fully understand until the very end, and that I have spent the 2 years since trying to process honestly. I want to tell you this story carefully, because it involves people I love, or loved, in the way you love family even when they have hurt you deeply. It involves grief and money and the specific cruelty of discovering a betrayal at a moment when you have no capacity left to absorb it. It involves my sister, Carol. And it involves a will that had been quietly rewritten over the course of 2 years without my knowledge. My mother had 2 daughters. Carol is 4 years older than me. We grew up close in the way sisters often are when the age gap is small enough to share friends and experiences, but large enough that there was always a slight hierarchy. Carol was the firstborn, the one who had arrived first and established the template. I was the second, the one who learned to navigate the space she had already defined. As adults, our relationship was functional and occasionally warm but not deep. We lived in different cities. We spoke on the phone regularly. We visited for holidays. There were no dramatic conflicts in our history, just the mild distance that develops between people who are connected by blood, but would not necessarily have chosen each other as friends. When my mother was diagnosed, Carol and I came together in the way families do during a crisis. We established a caregiving schedule. We divided responsibilities. Carol, who lived closer to my mother, took on more of the day-to-day presence, doctor appointments, medication management, the practical tasks that required physical proximity. I flew in every 6 weeks and stayed for extended stretches, covering Carol so she could rest, managing the household, sitting with my mother through the long evenings. It was, from the outside, a family handling a difficult situation as well as could be expected. What I did not know was what was happening during the hours and days I was not there. My mother had a will. She had created it with an estate attorney 12 years before her diagnosis. And to my knowledge it was straightforward. Her assets divided equally between Carol and me, with specific personal items designated for each of us. She had shown it to both of us years earlier, in the matter-of-fact way some parents handle these conversations, wanting her children to be prepared. I had no reason to think it had changed. 3 days before my mother died, she had a period of unusual clarity. The last weeks of her illness had been marked by increasing confusion and exhaustion, and these windows of lucidity had become precious and unpredictable. I was sitting with her on a Tuesday afternoon when she took my hand and told me she needed to tell me something. She told me she had changed her will. She said it the way someone says something they have been carrying for too long, with relief and with guilt simultaneously. She told me that Carol had spoken to her over many months about the family's financial situation, about Carol's own struggles, about what was fair given how much Carol had done as the primary caregiver. She told me that about 18 months earlier, she had met with a new attorney, not the one who had originally drafted the will, and had signed documents that changed the distribution significantly. The new arrangement left Carol 70% of the estate. I would receive 30%. My mother held my hand and said she was sorry. She said she had felt pressured in a way she could not fully explain, and that she had not known how to bring it up, and that she had told herself it would be all right. She passed away 3 days later. I want to describe what those 3 days were like because I think it matters to the story. I did not confront Carol during those days. My mother was dying. The house was quiet and heavy in the way houses get when something irreversible is approaching. Carol was present, and we moved around each other with the careful courtesy of people who are both focused on something larger than themselves. I sat with what my mother had told me. I turned it over. I tried to understand the full shape of it. Carol had spent 18 months, during the most vulnerable period of my mother's life, systematically building a case for why she deserved more. She had done this not through a single conversation but through accumulated pressure, repeated over weeks and months, at a time when my mother's judgment was compromised by illness and by the psychological dependency that often develops between a caregiver and the person being cared for. She had done it quietly enough that I had never detected it across 6 weeks of visits and regular phone calls. And she had used a different attorney, not the one my mother trusted and had worked with for years, but someone new. Someone without the context of the original arrangement or a relationship with our family. I understood, sitting with all of this, that what had happened had a legal term. Undue influence. The legal concept that describes a situation where someone in a position of trust and authority uses that position to override another person's free will in making legal decisions. It is one of the recognized grounds for contesting a will. I called an estate attorney the morning after my mother passed. The legal process that followed lasted 14 months. I will not walk you through every detail because estate litigation is genuinely complex and the specifics of our case involved factors that may not apply to other situations. What I will tell you is the shape of what happened. My attorney filed a formal contest of the will on the grounds of undue influence, and separately, on the grounds of my mother's diminished capacity at the time the new will was signed. The second argument was supported by her medical records, which documented the progression of her cognitive decline, and established that the period during which the new will was signed overlapped with a phase of documented impairment. The first argument, undue influence, required demonstrating the pattern of Carol's behavior during the caregiving period. This was harder to document, but not impossible. There were text messages between Carol and my mother that had been preserved on my mother's phone. There were records of the visits Carol had arranged to the new attorney, including a note in the attorney's file that described my mother as having been accompanied by her daughter, and having expressed some uncertainty about the changes she was making. That note was significant. An attorney who documents a client expressing uncertainty about the documents they are signing has, arguably, failed in their duty to that client. Carol contested the contest. She hired her own attorney. She argued that she had been the primary caregiver, that the new distribution reflected a fair acknowledgement of her contribution, and that my mother had made the decision freely. The mediation process took 3 sessions. I will tell you that sitting across a table from my sister while attorneys discussed our mother's estate in terms of percentages and asset values is one of the more surreal experiences of my life. Carol did not look at me directly for most of the first session. By the third session she was looking at me, and what I saw in her face was not defiance or guilt, but something more complicated. A kind of exhausted justification. The expression of someone who has told themselves a story about their own actions for long enough that they half believe it. The mediation produced a settlement. I cannot disclose the specific terms, but I will tell you that the outcome was significantly more favorable to me than the 70-30 split Carol had arranged, and that the settlement included a provision I had specifically requested. A formal acknowledgement, in writing, that the original will's equal distribution had been my mother's stated intention before the period of influence. That acknowledgement mattered to me more than the money. Carol and I have not spoken since the settlement was finalized. I have thought about this, about whether the silence is permanent, about whether there is a version of a relationship with my sister that is possible after this. I do not have a clear answer. What I know is that the silence, for now, feels necessary. Not as punishment, but as protection. There is a version of reconciliation that requires both people to be honest about what happened. And I do not believe Carol is capable of that honesty yet, if she ever will be. My mother's house was sold. The proceeds were distributed. The personal items she had designated for each of us were delivered. I have mine in my home. A few pieces of furniture, some photographs, a ceramic bowl she had kept on her kitchen counter for as long as I can remember. I look at that bowl sometimes and I think about the Tuesday afternoon when she held my hand and told me the truth. I think about what it cost her to do that, in those final days, when she had so little energy left. She had carried that secret for 18 months and she chose at the end to put it down. I am glad she did. Not for the legal outcome, though that mattered, but because it meant her final gift to me was honesty. She saw what had happened clearly enough to name it, and she named it. That is worth more to me than any percentage of any estate. I want to leave you with something I have thought about carefully since all of this resolved. There is a particular kind of vulnerability that comes with aging and illness. A vulnerability that the people closest to you are uniquely positioned to either protect or exploit. Most people protect it. The caregivers who show up every day, who absorb the difficulty and the grief and the exhaustion, who do it because they love the person and because it is right. Those people are extraordinary, and their contribution is real and significant and deserves acknowledgement. But the contribution of caregiving does not grant unlimited authority over another person's decisions. It does not override that person's right to make choices freely, without pressure, without repeated gentle arguments designed to shift their understanding of what is fair. Love and service are not currency that can be exchanged for control. My mother deserved to make her own choices. In the end, even with everything that had happened, I believe she did, because she chose in those final 3 days to tell me the truth. If you are navigating a situation involving an elderly parent and family members who have more access than you do, pay attention. Visit as often as you can. Have direct conversations with your parent about their wishes. Know the name of their attorney. These things feel unnecessary until suddenly they are not. And if you are ever in a situation where you suspect something has happened that wasn't right, talk to an estate attorney. Most offer free initial consultations. The legal framework for protecting vulnerable people exists precisely because situations like mine are not rare. My mother's bowl is still on my kitchen counter. I have kept it in the same spot she always kept hers. Some things you carry forward not as weight, but as memory, as a reminder of who someone was before the end, and who they chose to be when it mattered most. She chose well. In the end, she chose well.